to this webinar that is focused on ESPC, Energy Savings Performance Contracting Success for State and Local Governments. Really, we're talking about the MUSH market, which is shorthand for state and local governments, public education institutions, public health facilities. So I'd like to hand it off to Rod Sobin to just say a few words of welcome from NASEO. Go ahead, Rod.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate this. Extend my welcome from NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. For those of you who are not from the state energy offices, we are the organization of the 56 state and territorial energy offices. And I'll take the liberty to also extend this welcome on behalf of our partners at the Energy Services Coalition and NASEO, the National Association of Energy Service Companies, with whom we've collaborated, and you'll hear a bit about the principles work that we've worked on. And in addition, we've been collaborating with the Efficiency Valuation Organization, the Department of Energy, the National Labs, and particularly our Berkeley Lab friends and colleagues who are on this webinar on ways to advance and enhance ESPC as a cost-effective tool to improve state and other public and institutional building performance, not only energy performance, but environmental cost and even resilience. So we hope this webinar will be helpful to you and look forward to ongoing exchanges. And I'll hand it back to Liz before she hands it back to me for the presentations in a bit.
I think we're doing an Olympic relay right now. All right. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. This isn't in order of the people that are speaking here. It's alphabetical, I think. But first, we've got Phil Coleman from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Phil's been at the lab for quite a long time, over 20 years, and he does a lot of work, technical support for the Federal Energy Management Program, and he's also a team member on the E-Project Builder project here at Berkeley Lab. Rod Sobin, of course, is a senior director at National Association of State Energy Officials. I got that wrong there. And he does a tremendous amount of work in a lot of areas, including energy savings performance contracting and the grid interactive efficient buildings space as well. We're really happy to have David St. Jean here from the Maryland Office of Energy and Sustainability. David's been at the Maryland office there in his current position since 2018. He has just a world and wealth of experience before that, and also I can't even tell you the range of things that he works on there for the with the Department of General Services. He leads up quite a number of programs, including the Energy Savings Performance Contracting program there. So we will tap his expertise for that. I'm Liz Stewart. I've been at Berkeley Lab for over 12 years. I do research and program management, including the E-Project Builder team, and also a lot of research in the Energy Savings Performance Contracting and ESCO space. So before we sort of dive into what we're going to present today, I just want to mention, there's a huge opportunity. Energy savings performance contracting is a time-tested, it has a long track record of delivering large energy and cost savings to public institutions. However, in the MUSH market, there's still a huge opportunity. ESPC is underutilized sometimes. It's not necessarily well understood, or, it's got a lot of technical ins and outs. So folks need help with delivering and working with their energy service companies to get those projects to deliver and perform well. And so this particular webinar is focused a lot on how to verify those savings, track them, and be able to report those successes out to stakeholders. So measurement and verification, of course, is critical for fulfilling reporting and other kinds of compliance requirements, safeguarding public interests, and demonstrating the success of these projects and programs. So the U.S. Department of Energy has spent, and particularly the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, this particular webinar is sponsored by the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office, or WIP, They've developed quite a number of resources over the years, specifically for MUSH sector governments and institutions. The ESPC toolkit, which is linked here when we post the slides later, will let you all know when they're available. You'll be able to access all these links. So the ESPC toolkit has quite a number of tools and resources, and including some of these key measurement and verification resources, several of which we're going to talk about today. So first, I want to hand it back to Rod, who's going to talk about a really unique document developed recently, and that provides some really valuable guidance to these agencies. Go ahead, Rod.
Thanks, Liz. And if you can go to the next slide. So the next slide recapitulates a little bit of what Liz said. The numbers aren't exactly the same, but they're the same, order. ESPC has been a very successful public-private partnership mechanism that's been around for 3 decades or so, and lots of threes in the slide, I noticed. $30 billion, probably more now, of cost-effective upgrades, the order of $300 billion of additional potential market. However, despite it being around for quite some time, it's still quite unfamiliar and appears complex to a fair number of people, particularly in the state, local, MUSH market area. There have been, unfortunately, some cases of poorly structured projects, which have given a bit of a black eye in some locations to the mechanism. And there have been some cases where customers have not understood the contracts fully, or what is entailed in measurement and verification, what is guaranteed, what is not, which we hope to help in this webinar. And there have also been some cases of inadequate or misplaced documentation and tracking of the savings and performance, and this has led to some questioning of projects and programs. So we and our friends at ESC and NASEO worked together to develop a principles document to improve the understanding, quality, and confidence in the performance contracting mechanism. Next, please. So, there's a need for a well-defined understanding of performance contracting among all parties, the customers or potential customers, the ESCOs themselves, which often deal in different marketplaces under different legal strictures and such, as well as the state and local ESPC program managers. Further, there are also a number of consultants, including what we call owner's agents, who can work with customers and help them. And they all have some degrees of responsibilities to making these projects successful. So there's a need to enhance the clarity and transparency of contract provisions, of pricing, of M&V bases and what savings are being achieved, of responsibilities. Sometimes there are lack of clarity over who's responsible for what bits of operations and maintenance, and performance tracking. Our members in state energy offices and sister agencies, such as David's agency, the Department of General Services in Maryland, often have roles with respect to performance contracting, and these can vary depending on authority and resources. And they range from information provision to authority over oversight, and in some cases facilitation, technical assistance. In quite a few states, and we recommend this, there are model documents or template documents and programmatic tracking and reporting. So with ESC and NASEO, we developed the 10 principles that are aimed at state and local, both the program level and project level, for performance contracting. Next, please. I'll quickly go through the 10 principles. Of course, they're a little bit more detailed, but not a lot more detailed in the principles document, which is only a couple of pages. And there is some overlap among these principles, so they complement each other. First one is we feel that it's important for at the program level for there to be some funding and resource to provide for administration, technical assistance, to provide, as I mentioned, for updating of documents and guidance, and also for tracking at a program level and being able to report on how the performance contracting program works to their governors, to legislatures, and to the public. The public has the right to know how their taxpayer money is being used, and what savings are accruing from using these mechanisms. We think good programs have guidance on attributes of service, which is a long-winded way of saying, what is and is not an ESPC, what's allowable, what measures, what contract types, what financing mechanisms, and links to the law, the statutes and authorities that authorize these. We know that in various states, sometimes there are different laws governing state agency performance contracts as compared to local governments or higher education institutions. Third, we think there ought to be a guidance or a process roadmap, in essence, an ESPC guidebook, that goes over the contracting and financing processes, what's entailed in management and monitoring of a project, not only in starting up, but throughout its term, what is meant by commissioning, what is M&V, along with links to appropriate documents and resources. We think in the fourth principle that there ought to be models and standards, model contracts and related documents, policies, protocols, guidance. And then the fifth one is technical assistance, and I'll say a little bit more later as well about this. There's a need for technical, business, and administrative assistance to help the agencies and jurisdictions. Sometimes there's, frankly, a need for handholding. In other cases, there can be benefit to technical review of documents, of M&V reports and such. And we think that it's a good idea when the resources are available for the state agency to provide or to make available third-party owners' representatives to provide these sorts of assistance in creating these projects and developing the projects, as well as working with the projects as they go through their contract terms. Next, please. This is followed by standard M&V guidance, and you will hear quite a bit more about M&V today to make sure that the customer understands baselines, what their requirements are, understands adjustments. We recognize that often in performance contracts, the facility may change usage, the hours change. Lord knows with COVID, there have been tremendous number of changes. Last year was abnormal, and I hope not the new normal. So there are quite a few things that need to be understood with respect to measurement and verification and related tracking of performance. Then project and contract management, there's a need to assure that the M&V reports and other documents are reviewed by technical consultants. Again, it could be an owner's agent, it could be with a state agency, or it could be an experienced person within the customer's own jurisdiction or agency to assure that the ESPC conditions are being met and the savings guarantees are being met, and also to ensure the tracking and proper filing of all the relevant documents and such. Program activity tracking, we think that ESPC investments in savings and performance ought to be tracked at a program level, as well as at the individual project level. We'll talk a little about that in the next principle, as well as later in today. So there, we think dashboards or similar sorts of mechanisms are useful for transparency to the public and to policymakers, whether it's legislatures or the governor's office. And the next one, standard tracking mechanisms. And we think that it's important to gain the ESCO, the energy service companies, assistance in maintaining transparent documentation, tracking how the projects are going. And we think that eProject Builder, a platform used by the federal government and some states, is a very good way to do things. And as you will hear a bit later, there is a new eProject Express mechanism that is a streamlined version. We have heard from states and localities that eProject Builder seem to be a bit complicated. So this eProject Express is a great new tool and a great new platform for tracking performance of projects and for helping states and jurisdictions to do roll-up reports and track their portfolio of projects as well. Finally, and often missing, I'm sorry to say, there's a need for mechanisms for customer feedback so that the customer agency or jurisdiction can indicate how their project went or their series of projects, indicate satisfaction, and also make suggestions to improve the process. Next, please. We've added a few other resources we recommend for states and jurisdictions to consider the Energy Service Coalition's key attributes for guaranteed energy savings performance contracting program readiness. There is a little bit of overlap with the principles. However, it talks about establishing programs within primarily states, but this can be applied to localities as well. Getting buy-in, explaining to policymakers, how this works. I'd mentioned the eProject Builder and eProject Express tool. Liz has already indicated a great set of resources in the BOE's ESPC toolkit. And there's also a new Performance Contracting National Resource Center, PCNRC, which is not an acronym because I can't pronounce it. And that will be another means to access tools and resources. And we are working with ESC, NASEO, the labs, Department of Energy, and others in developing a training certificate program for owners' representatives to help you identify qualified individuals to hire and use to help you through your performance contracting projects. And I think that's what I have to say. So I will hand it back to you, Liz, and look forward to the rest.
Great. Thanks, Rod, so much. Let me get unmuted. Okay, so the next section of our webinar today is going to focus on 3 documents that are available on the ESPC toolkit. A document that talks about the business case for conducting measurement verification, a document on understanding what is your ESPC savings guarantee, and then some strategies for success that come directly from state energy offices and ESCOs on, what are good strategies for approaching measurement verification. So first, I'll start with the business case. How it really does provide cost-effective value for mush market entities. So first of all, of course, we should talk about why measurement verification, or M&V, is necessary. It's really the only or key activity that provides the basis for the enforcement of the savings guarantee. There's a guarantee, you have no idea if it's met unless you conduct measurement verification of the project. It also allows customers to hold the ESCO accountable and themselves, because certainly shortfalls can happen, through actions or inactions on the part of the customer, as well as, errors or mismeasurements or things that happen on a project. And so measurement verification is a way to uncover what's really happening and why. So without it, the facility owner can't know if the project is achieving the guaranteed level of savings. And it further, it helps you report your successes. You get those actual measurements of how your project's performing. You can report out to your stakeholders, look at what we're doing. And of course, those savings can translate into economic activity, can translate into, greenhouse gas emissions reductions. There are all sorts of ways you can use the M&V data and other project data to report out your successes. And of course, it's very important where in states where that require that the project costs be paid from savings. So M&V is an absolute necessity, and it can help attribute whatever issues there are, which of course helps you correct them. So in terms of the benefits of well-executed M&V, I think I kind of covered some of those. But in addition to, meeting statute and understanding what's happening in your projects and making sure that the savings are actually covering the costs, you can also identify further opportunities. As the measurements happen, other things pop up. It's a really great way to really understand what's going on in your building. And as I mentioned, it quantifies savings for other goals: job creations, emissions, waste reduction. So there's a whole host of benefits that that mush market entities can get from their measurement and verification results. So we do know that M&V costs money. and it does typically need to be a part of the project cost that's paid out of savings. So how do I maximize the value of M&V? So all of the practitioners who are successful that we spoke with said it's incredibly important to incorporate M&V from the very start, included in your, ESCO RFP, included in the preliminary assessment or the IGA, all the way through the contract. And then, of course, post installation, you will do the post installation verification and then your annual or periodic M&V. People also really recommend using third-party technical support, such as an owner's rep. As Rod mentioned earlier, we are working on a training certificate program for owner's reps. They can help interpret the results. They can also help throughout the development process to help make sure that your M&V plan makes sense, that it's fair, that all of the risks and responsibilities are laid out and clear to avoid one of the big things that a good owner's rep and good contract document and M&V plans do is avoid future litigation. Make sure that all of the components are there and that they are clearly spelled out. Of course, it's very important that all the stakeholders involved in a project understand that what kinds of M&V approaches are being used and that they are appropriate. There are various levels and complexity of the energy conservation and other measures. And so there are different measurement verification approaches that can be taken to align with the level of uncertainty around the savings and how much surety you'll need for the various measures. And then, of course, conducting it for multiple performance years is incredibly critical. Many states require it to be conducted through the full performance and or financing term because things can change over time. Buildings can change 5-7 years into a project. And, down the road, if you're not doing measurement and verification, you will not know if you are getting shortfalls and not meeting, for example, your statute that the project pay for itself through the savings. So we in the document that's available on the toolkit, we have a couple of mini business case examples. David St. Jean is going to talk about the second one here. Here's just an example, a university that had good metering in place. They had a project that had, different kinds of equipment installed, fume hoods, etc. A capital project value of 1.3 million, guaranteed annual savings of 81,000, and they were using two different. The ESCO actually used two different options to measure the savings, and what they discovered was they had actually scheduled a 3-month M&V checkup about 3 months into the performance period, and the ESCO learned that the project was heading for a 40% annual saving shortfall. That's pretty significant. And they were able to pinpoint that it was attributable both to the university because the university engineering team had provided some incorrect baseline calculations that they discovered later, and the ESCO had also done some incorrect calculations. So right here it says university was pleased. Of course, they were not thrilled that they were heading for a shortfall, but they were super thrilled that they did M&V, caught what their metering could not. And so the outcome of this particular example was that the ESCO actually remunerated the university for part of the shortfall. And then they, of course, had to do additional work to remedy their portion of the issue and mitigate any future shortfalls. I'm going to invite David St. Jean to speak about this example at the Maryland Office of Energy and Sustainability. David, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Good morning and afternoon, everybody. Before I get into this kind of anecdotal evidence, I'll just give you a very short background on our ESPC program, because Maryland's been doing this for state government buildings since the mid-90s. We have 26 active projects valued at about $265 million with $25 million of annual savings guarantees. And we are one of the states that requires measurement and verification throughout the term of the project. And we also require that the ESCO perform maintenance throughout the term of the project on everything that they install. which I think is a little unusual, but the two are inextricably tied together at some point. And as far as M&V, we've been doing that in-house up until recently. But actually next month, the third-party M&V firm is going to start with us to review the annual reports as they come in. We're currently reviewing, I think, about 15 or 16 a year. And we're actually kind of looking forward to that. It's been difficult to keep people in-house with the proper training and experience to do that kind of work. So this particular project was one of three that we caught, one of 3 out of 26 projects that were not meeting their annual savings guarantee. This one actually is in year 8 now, I think. And the shortfall has been very significant, as you can see here. And the shortfall actually is continuing into the future as far as we can see. So we are feeling that reviewing the M&V report every year is basically pays for itself, pays for a good portion of the project as well. Back to you, Liz. You're on mute, Liz.
Okay, Liz, I think you're on mute, but this is what
I am.
Okay.
No, I'm good. It's for some reason the little unmute icon takes a minute to show up on my screen. Sorry about that. Great. Thanks, David. All right, so we're going to hand it over to Phil, and Phil, take it away. Phil was the primary author of this particular document about understanding your savings guarantee, and he's an expert in this stuff. So go ahead, Phil.
And if I remember right, Liz, both you and Rod, and let's see, Don Gilligan at NASEO, we a couple of people at ESC, we had a number of co-authors, but anyway, we created this document, Understanding Your Savings Guarantee. So it's the second of the third that we'll discuss here. We created this document, I think, really because a number of us who've, been involved with this industry for a number of years have all seen instances where customers really did not understand their guarantees, at least in part. And so, we felt that it was important to address this. So, all right, next slide. So I really want to start off by explaining, how do we really define savings in an ESPC? And so I put a formula up here, and I'll leave it up here for the first several slides. It's just the energy and water use in the before condition, and the energy, minus the energy and water use after the project, after the intervention. That's it at its core. But the question is it really that simple? And I think it's pretty intuitive that it can't quite be that simple, because as the years go by, life happens. Life happens in buildings. Things change. There's expansions. There's expansions of buildings. There's expansions of hours or contractions. There are changes, and so the trick in ESPC M&V is try to find out what of those changes are sort of attributable to the ESPC, to the ESCO's work, and what are really not. So let me give you a couple examples. So, if the ESCO does lighting work, which happens in most ESPCs, is the ESCO going to assume the risk that the hours stay the way they were when they were initially measured, the 12 hours per day or whatever? Are they going to assume the risk that the facility size will not, that the building will not expand? How about the loads on the chiller they put in? Let's say, a key space was office space and now it becomes an exercise facility. So the loads go way up, right? All the people working and sweating and so on. Are they going to assume the risk for that? And the answer is, yeah, they'll assume the risk for that if you pay them to. but it'll be expensive because they can't control those things. And I think the real trick in M&V is to, hold the ESCO's feet to the fire on the things that, they should be responsible for, like the equipment performance, but not for the things that they can't control, and that have always been, your risk, right? Energy rates, weather, loads, etc. So, okay, another topic. What about the money? How are the energy rates factored into the ESPC savings guarantee? So it's really customary for the savings to be expressed in dollar terms, and I'm not always thrilled with that, but that's how it happens. But it's important to keep in mind that those dollars that are guaranteed are subject to stipulated, contractually stipulated energy rates in the contract. So it's, you really should understand that the heart of the guarantee is on the energy units, and not the dollars. The dollars, hopefully the energy rates will track what the contract says they will in terms of escalations and so on. But in case they don't, they might go higher or lower. But what the ESCO is really guaranteeing, if you look at most of these contracts carefully, is the units. Okay, next slide. Okay, so it's also important to understand that these guarantees are predicated on measurement and verification baselines, okay? And those baselines are sort of think of them as the sort of the before condition, or the pre. And they can be expressed for, depending on the project, they can be expressed for the whole facility. So you're just looking at the electricity bill for the entire facility, or they can be looked at for the individual energy conservation measures, or ECMs, in the project. So we might be looking at just the electricity for the overhead lighting ECM that the ESCO put in. So we'd handle that by doing some separate metering of those lights, independent of everything else that's going on in the building. So it can be whole building M&V or individual ECM M&V. The latter is sometimes referred to as retrofit isolation M&V. The baselines come with sets of assumptions, and I think I alluded to this before, about what your usage is. How many hours are those lights going to be turned on? What's going to be the loads that are facing that new chiller that the ESCO put in? Okay, so that's okay, but you should understand that those assumptions should be based on measurements that the ESCO has taken in its investment grade audit in general. So they can put light loggers in and see, well, how long are those lights on? All right, they've got 13 hours. You might negotiate with the site a little bit. The facilities people say, well, we think they're going to be on a little bit less, so you settle on 12 hours. That kind of negotiation is very typical, but the heart of the of that figure should be a measurement. The assumptions are also used to compute the usage in the post condition, in the after condition, whether or not they still represent the actual condition. So, in most contracts, you can't go back to the ESCO and say, well, look, all this lighting that we did, we assumed the 12 hours, and we're working shorter shifts, and the lights are only running for 8 or 9 hours. In the contract, it says 12. That's what you agreed to. That's what you're gonna pay for. Now, conversely, if if you institute the night school and the hours are 16 or 18 per day, that's the facility gets that windfall, gets that additional savings in essence. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we talked about all these assumptions. Are all these assumptions fair? And my argument is yes, in general, yes, they're very fair. Again, the goal should be to hold the ESCO responsible for, for what it's installed, for the equipment performance that it's guaranteed. But in general, not for things that it doesn't control, the loads, the hours, etc. Okay. And again, the key is to make sure that those assumptions are realistic. Are those lights really on 12 hours per day? Well, talk to your facility people, maybe talk to your administrators. What's going to be happening in the building, looking into the future. Is it reasonable to expect that the electricity rates will go up 5% per year? Well, in general, probably not. And you probably don't want to take that kind of risk. You should be doing some escalating, so you're not leaving dollar savings on the table. And I'll just make a little plug. DOE has a tool. It's called EERC. You can look it up to help with that estimation of what the rates are likely to do, and that taps DOE's experts. So it's sort of independent of your project. Okay, next slide. So, on that topic of energy prices, I always, when I teach ESPC, like to show this slide because it's sort of I think energy prices are a source of misunderstanding sometimes in these deals. So follow along with me here. The left-hand set of bars here says no ESPC, current cost. So think of the green as your energy units, kWh or therms or MMBTUs or what have you, and the blue bar is the costs, the rate for those kWh or therms. Okay, so that's your current condition. That's what you're looking at now. Now, let's just hypothetically say, okay, you institute an ESPC, you get enormous savings. It looks like 50% savings here. That'd be ambitious, although some projects do deliver that. So now you've cut your energy units in half. You're using half the kilowatt hours that you used to, and the prices have stayed the same. So you're using, your energy bill is half what it used to be. Okay. All right. Now let's move to the third set of bars. Let's suppose you hadn't done the ESPC, okay? And it's 3 or 4 years down the road and there's a lot of energy price increase. We've seen this at certain times. We saw this in natural gas in the 2000s. They went up dramatically. So your units may stay the same. You're still using the same amount to heat the building and heat its water and so on, but the unit prices double. Okay, so now your bill is double. Okay, again, it's a hypothetical situation. Now let's take that same situation, but with the ESPC having been implemented. Okay, so now, your gas or electricity goes down, the 50%. Well, again, this is a great ESPC, our hypothetical one. It goes down 50%. So you're using half the units. Okay, that's in the green. And so what's the implication for the energy prices for your energy bill? Well, it's in the dark blue there, and it's the same as it was 3 or 4 years ago before you started all this. But remember the third bar, what it would have been. So in essence, the light blue there on the fourth set is reflective of your savings given these energy prices that are twice as high. Now, note that those savings, that light blue bar, that's twice what it was in the second set. Your prices go up by twofold. Well, your dollar savings go up by twofold. So the moral of the story here is ESPC is really a terrific way to sort of hedge against rising energy prices. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it back to Liz.
Great, thanks, Phil. Actually, I think I want to stop and respond to a question from someone here. Mahi asks, can the ESPC be renegotiated if the ECMs don't line up? And I guess by don't line up means not performing. And I mean, I would defer to Phil and David on this, but I think there should be provisions in your contract with the ESCO for what happens when the ECMs don't perform, et cetera. I don't know anything about possible renegotiation of contracts. If you've done the contract right in the first place, you shouldn't need to. There would be provisions to take care of that.
So let me take a stab, and David can pipe in if he wants to. This happens, but it happens rarely. So let's go back to the case I laid out before. You've assumed that the lighting retrofit, which is, let's say, a big portion of the savings, it's predicated on the lights being on for 12 hours per day. Things change, and the lights are only on 6 hours per day. So you go back to the ESCO and say, well, look, the contract says 12, we understand that, but we're not really getting those savings. Well, you can renegotiate with the ESCO, but their costs are what their costs are, and they're not going to assume that risk. So you can restructure the deal, but really that's probably going to help more with the optics than actually saving you money. So if it's just because usage went down, and it's not something the ESCO is really responsible for, don't think that you can, go back to the contract and get relief. Now, if, like in the example David used, if the ESCO is responsible or partly responsible, and there's a shortfall and you want to go back and renegotiate things, you can, although I think a better, less sort of a litigious way, let's say metaphorically, way to handle it is to just have the ESCO compensate by, installing some more savings measures or expanding on existing savings measures. David, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, the way we treat this is that, it's at that point, it's up to the ESCO. Do you want to continue to pay shortfall payments every year, or do you want to install more measures to reduce them?
Yeah.
And that would be the contract negotiation. Do we allow them to install more measures? And we always would, if offered.
Great. Thank you. Very, very helpful answers. All right. We're going to move on to the next, the last portion of our, let's see, we got one more message. Great. Mahi said, thank you. Great. All right. So we're going to talk about the third of the M&V documents. This is strategies for M&V success. And the information in this document comes from very experienced state level ESPC practitioners, state energy offices and departments of general services like David St. Jean's organization, as well as ESCOs. So we did some surveys and a lot of interviews around, what are some good strategies for M&V success. So we kind of touched on this earlier, but how would we define successful M&V? I mean, it's certainly up to each organization as to what they need to get out of it, but fundamentally, it ensures that the project meets its contractually specified level of savings. It ensures the costs are covered by savings where that's required. Very important piece of successful M&V that all of the people we spoke with agreed to is that it has to involve everyone who has a stake in the project. So that includes both the business side, is it legal, is it purchasing, management, and the technical sides, and that includes, facilities. So when you create your M&V plan and conduct, particularly, in the early stages of development, everyone needs to understand what's in there and have a say in it. And as I mentioned earlier, M&V has to be a key part of all phases of project development and any additional specific objectives of the ESPC program or the building owner. So in this document, which I'll just highlight quickly, you can go and read it later. We highlighted successful strategies implemented at two key levels, at a state ESPC program level, particularly where those programs have jurisdiction over state buildings and other facilities. Some states Maybe the State Energy Office also supports ESPC in municipalities or, university or even K through 12. And then, of course, some strategies that these folks recommended for individual projects. Now, some of these strategies do require, for example, funding or certain kinds of levels of authority, et cetera. So what we did in this document was sort of lay out, here's key strategies, and here are the conditions or level of authority needed. So they may not be right for every state. You kind of have to look at your situation and see which of these strategies might be doable in your current condition, or work on changing those conditions. So this is kind of a wordy slide, and you can look at this later in the document, but it lists sort of 6 key strategies at the state program level that were common among these practitioners. First one is, of course, that a state program can provide tools and resources such as guidance documents, model contracts, and templates. And if they are authorized to do so, they can require their use. If there's some portion of a program, for example, Nevada offers reimbursement of the IGA cost if they participate in the program, and in return, those participants who get that funding must abide by certain program rules, use certain documents, they have to use eProject Builder, things like that. Of course, they have a program and they have a authorization to do that requirement. Other strategies include establishing protocols that enable a consistent and timely review of M&V reports. We did hear that, there are certainly cases where a local, school district, state, any, in maybe less experienced entities get the M&V reports and they're short-staffed or otherwise just are not able to review them. So obviously you want to be able to review these reports so that you can catch those shortfalls and make sure that your project is performing as expected. So you need to set up some kind of, a spreadsheet and make sure that every quarter there's a person that's reviewing the M&V reports, or as David is doing, they're subcontracting M&V report review, and that's actually going to save them money. They don't have to train a staff person. They don't have to hire and fire. They can just use whatever time of that subcontractors that they need to use. And so that's a very good cost saving measure for them. Of course, you'll want to communicate the impacts of your projects and your programs. So, that's something that any organization can do to its stakeholders. You don't need an authority to report out what your projects are doing in most cases. Ideally, a state program that's got some level of jurisdiction can also provide oversight. So in some states, every project in the state basically has to go through the state energy office, and there's state energy staff that must review it. That's not the case in every state, but where possible, contract oversight by qualified state staff or third-party technical advisors like owners reps is a really key strategy for success. And then, of course, providing technical expertise at critical points. So, for example, during the RFP, during the IGA, the investment grade audit, just key places where you need a lot of technical expertise. And these, of course, does require some kind of funding or authority or state expertise. There might be state staff that is trained and has this sort of expertise. And then, of course, having some kind of tracking and document preservation system. I mean, actually, in our latest survey of the ESCO industry, we found that quite a number of ESCOs, significant percentage say that, several years into a project, let's say there's been turnover at a state energy office or agency, and the new folks come in and they say, hey, we're paying for this ESPC. Do you have the documentation that tells us what we're paying for? And it's often difficult to find that documentation years into a performance contract. So something like eProject Builder, eProject Express is a great way to store key documents about your projects, and of course the data for the project initiation and the savings, so that you can find this information and have it in perpetuity during that performance contract. That will make a tremendous difference and be able to tout your successes, really know what your projects are doing. So those are the key program level strategies. There's a couple of questions coming in, and I'll look at those in a minute after I talk about the next slide. And then the folks that we talked to said, of course, at the individual project level, there are strategies that can be implemented as well. So Rod Sobin mentioned earlier use of an owner's rep. Some states actually provide this and have funding for that, or they will provide a list of possible owner's reps. So it really depends on what's available in your state. And this new forthcoming owner's rep certificate program should be a real boon to everybody in the mush market. Once we have an established group of people who've earned that certificate, that'll help tremendously with finding someone who's actually qualified to be an owner's rep. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, engaging all key decision makers in the M&V plan, very, very important. Ensure that the M&V reports are actually read when the ESCO provides them. Ensure that you have an M&V plan that clearly delineates the responsibilities, as Phil talked about, you know, what happens in the case of changes in buildings, etc., things like that. Those need to be spelled out in your M&V plan and in your contract. The M&V plan, of course, is a part of your contract. And then, of course, you know, the maintenance, the operations and maintenance on the installed equipment, you need to make sure that those are going to be maintained, that there's a plan in place, that whoever the staff is that needs to maintain that, if the ESCO is not being contracted to maintain it, you know, the staff needs to have a good training plan in place and good procedures so that they can assure that that equipment performs as well as it is supposed to contractually. We got a couple of questions in, and I am just going to look at them to see if we need to answer any of them. Is there a range of an IGA cost, such as percentage of the cost of a project, dollars per square foot? Okay, great. That's one I can't answer. Phil says the average in the federal sector is about 4 to 5% of the ESPC's total investment cost. Great, thank you. That was a question from Sumesh. All right, so I did want to mention, we've mentioned a few times eProject Express, which is a new pathway within eProject Builder. And eProject Express was recently released, and it's specifically for those who need a more streamlined approach, such as state, local, educational institutions, to input your project data, to track it so that you have the information about your portfolio of projects at your fingertips. It's got a custom report feature. You can upload those documents that you need to keep in perpetuity and access them very quickly. So it helps in so many ways to standardize the way that your project data are stored, to enable you to report out, etc. So Rod earlier posted this link in the chat. Thanks Rod for doing that. There is the first training webinar, this new pathway, this new system is on August 19th. So there's the registration link. And then if you want to register for an account for eProject Builder or eProject Express, they're both in the eProject Builder system. That's the link there. And we will make these slides available to everyone who registered for the webinar. They'll either be posted on DOE's ESPC toolkit. Hopefully that will be able to happen. If not, we'll post it on Lawrence Berkeley National Lab's website, and we'll notify everyone who's registered for this webinar. Someone asked one more question here. Dale Hawes says, does the answer to the estimated cost of M&V define the cost of the full term of all activity or an annual amount? Let's see, I think that answer actually was the cost of an IGA, Dale, not M&V. Someone had asked, what's the range of an IGA cost compared to the cost of the project?
That's right.
Yeah.
Liz, let me just butt in for a sec. That 4 to 5% I quoted, that's, I think, our average in the federal sector where I do most of my work. That means the IGA's cost is about 4 to 5% of the total investment cost of the ESPC. So I hadn't addressed the M&V cost, but that again, I'm going to quote federal numbers because they're ones I'm familiar with, that runs about 2.5% to 3% of the total savings for a project is the customary cost of the M&V.
So Phil, does that mean, so if you're doing M&V, for 10 years for a 10-year project, that means it's 2 to 3% of the annual savings
Each year.
Each year.
That's right.
Okay.
Each year.
Okay.
But that's,
Great.
those are, that's federal numbers, and the M&V is done each year. In the federal sector, it's usually done annually. But I think those numbers are not going to be, too far off for non-federal projects. I just don't know those statistics. I don't think anyone does, actually.
Got it. Yeah, well, we will know a little bit more about it as more projects get into eProject Builder and eProject Express. We will be able to do some aggregate analysis on those sorts of things ultimately. Someone asked, Mahi asked, does David or anyone know if Delaware has an Office of Energy and Sustainability?
This is Rodney. I put in the address. There is an energy office. All states have energy offices, and there is a Delaware Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy within the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. I do want to, Liz, there was a previous question that I think we missed.
Okay.
Mike Donovan, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Mike. Are there model or best practice M&V plans available to assist when reviewing sample M&V plans submitted in response to an RFP?
Go ahead, Phil.
Okay, so I answered that in the chat. The
Okay.
answer is yes, kind of. So the real Bible for M&V is called the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. I think we've alluded to that, IPMVP. But FEMP, the Federal Energy Management Program out of DOE, maintains a sort of what's the term we use? I mean, they have their own guideline, and it's got in section 6 of FEMP's M&V guideline version 4, there's I think it's 1 to 2 page outlines for 19 different quite common energy conservation measures that you'll see in ESPCs. So I think as I said in the chat, I think it's not gospel, but they're good points of departure. And, if your ESCO is proposing to do something significantly different, you might say, well, here's what FEMP advocates, what do you think of that, and why the difference?
And there are probably some state energy offices who have good programs, probably have contracting documents out there that have good M&V plan examples. But I do want to let folks know that another project that's underway is the creation of a new national set of ESPC model documents. We've got a couple of different model documents. The Department of Energy has one. There's one on the Energy Services Coalition website, and they've been around a while. So we're in a process of modernizing those. And I don't know the timeline yet of when the new set will be out, but certainly that should provide also some help in terms of what a good M&V plan should look like in your contract documents. So please stay tuned. Get yourself signed up on the EERE mailing list, and so that you can get the state and local spotlight and things like that. And when that comes out, it will be announced for sure. Probably going to be next, definitely in 2022, not this year. Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. And we are at the top of the hour. So here's our contact information. Again, we'll contact everyone. We'll let you know when these slides and when the recording is posted. And you can certainly follow up with us with any questions that you have. We really appreciate your time and hope this was helpful information for you. Thank you so much.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you.